I am here speaking to award-winning makeup artist Dave and Lou Elsey of Igor Studios. It's not pronounced Igor, is it? Like Marty Feldman said in Young Frankenstein. It's not Igor.
That's how we feel.
Okay. Well, we'll say Igor.
It very much depends on how we feel.
Okay. Well, we'll say Igor for now. You've seen their work Dave, you won an Oscar with Rick Baker on The Wolf Man. You guys worked on Where the Wild Things Are together, Beauty and the Beast, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and not only do you guys collaborate, but you're also in love and married, and how wonderful to be collaborating with someone you love and are married to. So, thank you for speaking with us about Dracula. So, first of all, congratulations on the excellent work on Dracula. Binged the series with my wife, and we're huge Dracula fans, and we thought it was terrific. It was a nice new twist on the Bram Stoker story. So congrats.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, what a nice project to be able to do.
Yeah. I mean, we knew straight away, that it was something that we were really interested in. And then when we ended up going and having a meeting with Sue Virtue about it, and we talked about the project, and she gave us the script. We were just so excited. And then we were supposed to have a sort of second meeting with her, but we got home, and I immediately started reading it, and was just I was just so drawn in. I read the whole thing in like an hour, and was, they were getting to certain bits and going, oh my God, I mean, it was like being a little kid again, and I was, it was so good. It was so good. And it's such a great script for that first episode. Well, actually all of them, but it was really lovely to just get that fresh new take,
well,
and have all the traditional stuff that we all know about Dracula too,
Exactly. That I did like that balance between the traditional story beats that they kept and then the nice new modern tweaks. Before you got involved with this, what was your level of Dracula fandom? Were you guys huge Dracula fans? And if so, who are your favorite Draculas?
Huge. I mean, huge. This is how we got into it, really. Lou and I have been watching Dracula movies since the 70s. And with which we've pretty much seen all the different iterations of Dracula, and we both have a very strong fondness for Christopher Lee.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because he was like our Dracula growing up in the 70s. He was in glorious Technicolor. The blood was red, and he was the perfect sort of person to play Dracula. And it's very difficult to follow in his footsteps, actually. Gary Oldman, I thought, was very good.
Yeah, he's tremendous.
Very iconic. But there's an awful lot of people who played Dracula over the years who have sort of fell by the wayside, didn't work quite so well. But we knew that because this was going to be done by the BBC and was written by Mark Gatiss, who is literally a walking encyclopedia of horror, and Steven Moffat, who is a terrific writer, we felt this had the right pedigree and had the potential to be a classic Dracula all of its own. So we like Christopher Lee, but we like all the Draculas. We like Bela Lugosi. We're very, very good fans, very big fans of Bela Lugosi. But also Nosferatu is a big influence.
Yeah.
Nosferatu was a kind of an early knockoff of Dracula, because they didn't get the rights to do Dracula from Bram Stoker's family. They just simply kind of did their own version of it, which turned out to be incredibly weird and incredibly interesting, and has one of the most iconic Dracula makeups, really, of all time, the most iconic vampire makeups that probably wouldn't have come into being had they got the rights. The thing about Dracula is that he's always he's evolved. Even after Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, the character has always evolved. It evolved when he sort of was writing it. It evolved when they did the first play of Dracula, and it evolved beyond that. And it started to take on little pieces of everything. Even Nosferatu, which the Bram Stoker's family were not in favor of, was the one where they came up with that Dracula can be destroyed by sunlight. Now, we always think of that as Bram Stoker. That's not in the book, So we wanted to do this. We were fans of this. And we wanted to have our chance. We wanted to have our crack at doing Dracula,
Well, what was really nice about when we read the script is that, there were so many different aspects to the Dracula character in there. So there was a lot of, great sort of fateful stuff to the book, but also to every other movie and reiteration of Dracula that there had been. So it was a great sort of melting pot of all the cool things about Dracula. And then Steven and Mark then added their own flavour into it, and we were big fans of Sherlock anyway, and, really, really loved their writing, and it just seemed perfect, it seemed perfect.
It was a very good fit.
It really was, yeah.
Well, you mentioned some of my favorite Draculas. I would have to say the one that sticks with me the most is actually also Christopher Lee, only because growing up as a very small child, while many fathers were taking the kids to sporting events and this, my father was forcing me to watch Hammer Dracula films. So I have so many memories of hiding behind the chair with all that vivid red blood you were talking about. But what a fabulous Dracula. So good choice on your number one. And I also love Lugosi in the role. And that might be my favorite Universal monster movie, is that the original Dracula with Bela Lugosi. I think it's so good. And Renfield in that movie. Oh my gosh. But you have a Renfield in your series as well, who I wish we'd seen more of Renfield. But let's move forward a little bit. You mentioned that Mark Gatiss was a guru of all things horror and Dracula, I guess. What were those original concept meetings like between you guys and Steven Moffat, obviously, in what the look was they wanted to go for? Obviously, your actors gave you so much of it. Is it Claes Bang? Is that how you pronounce his name? Claes Bang?
Claes Bang, yeah.
Such a good look for it. Yeah. But in terms of the makeups and all that, what was the feeling they were going after?
Well, I'll tell you, the meetings were quite something, because we never really worked together before. We didn't really know each other, but it became apparent very, very early on into the meetings, I'm talking within a few minutes, that it was as if we'd all grown up together. We were all into this in the same way. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, a lot of the early meetings degenerated into sort of fanboy, just enjoyment of the genre, and weren't that specific. I mean, we one of the things that we talked about early on were quite, very, very, all of us kind of were on the same page with this, is that we felt that one of the great forgotten iterations of Dracula that really worked was this BBC Dracula that was done in the 70s, which we all saw when it first came on. It had Louis Jourdan as Dracula, and he was fantastic. He was spectacular in it, and it's very, not that anything is particularly. There isn't really one film that is close to Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think it's a common misconception where people say, "Oh, why doesn't anybody ever do Bram Stoker's Dracula? Why don't they actually do the book?" And it's because the book was never really. It was a work in progress, and all the things that we now associate with Dracula were little add-ons that people added to it all the time. So the cloak and the way he dresses and all of that stuff, him having to, being afraid of daylight, going out in sunlight, all that stuff evolved. It wasn't there originally. It's not in the book. In the book, he's wandering around in daylight all the time, So we discussed but we loved this version that the BBC did. And so we got onto that. And we actually, one of the things that came out of that was Louis Jourdan has these long fingernails in it that we all kind of were obsessed about a little bit. And so we wanted to do our version of those. So our Dracula has these long fingernails. And we had the idea that his fingernails and his teeth are made of the same thing. And that they actually, if you look at them, they're not shaped ordinary fingernails, they're shaped like teeth. So he has sort of teeth on his fingers, But we talked about all sorts of things. I mean, there was one time there was this idea that we wouldn't do traditional Dracula fangs, and Mark Gatiss had mentioned this idea of this sort of
it's like a
lamprey worm mouth.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
But we realised that we weren't going to get it, which is kind of a neat idea, but it's a different vampire to Dracula.
Yes.
Dracula is this aristocratic count,
Yes.
And we've seen those kind of, the other types of vampires now in other movies where, tentacles come out of their mouths and do all sorts of things. That seems like a separate,
yes.
That's not Dracula. So we quickly went back to doing fangs again.
Well, I think it was also about embracing, that classic look, wasn't it? But trying to put a slightly different twist on it. But I think that was just a step too far, wasn't it?
Yeah. And then the next part of that jigsaw was meeting Clace. And one of the things that I always loved about Christopher Lee is Christopher Lee has beautiful 1970s teeth. They're not straight, tombstones, and it really gives a ferocity to his mouth, aside from the fangs.
It's the bottom teeth, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're the most interesting, really.
Really interesting, yeah. So, and then we met Clace, and the first thing we noticed, we went, well, Clace is a European. Clace does not have straight teeth. He doesn't have the Hollywood smile.
Right.
And we were delighted to see that his teeth overlapped and did all sorts of weird little things. And we were like, well, we have to make this part of the design of his fangs. And so that Clace became an important part of our design. Just meeting him and seeing him became an important part of us sort of thinking about what we were going to do and how we were going to do it, because he looks, if Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee had a baby, it would be Clace Bang.
That's so true. Perfect casting. Honestly, that is a tall order to live up to a classic Dracula portrayal, and I thought he was great. And I'm glad he didn't have perfect teeth. Now that you guys had your direction you were heading with the Dracula character and the other makeups, let's dive into each episode. There's only 3. I would like to talk about the key makeup effects moments in each of the 3. We'll build up to Dracula's wonderful old age to youth transformation. Why don't we start in episode 1? Let's talk about that beautiful Harker makeup. What a wonderful performance, number 1, by John Heffernan. A great performance that really anchors the episode. Yeah. That interview between him and Sister Agatha is just the way they handled that was beautiful. But his transformation from young, healthy man to undead whatever is really well done. Can you guys talk about how you pulled that off?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know who was going to play that part for quite a long while. So I did some initial designs, which
generic, weren't they? Really?
They were kind of generic, but it kind of had a lot of ideas that actually then became what that makeup ended up looking like. And then, of course, they sort of went into the background while we worked on everything else. And then we found out that John Heffernan was cast. And we looked at his face. The first thing we did was look him up on the internet. We realized that we knew his work very well. And we went, well, he's perfect for the design that we've done. He's got kind of a long, thin face, and there's almost a Peter Cushing quality to him, like a young Peter Cushing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we thought that was a really cool thing as soon as we saw him. The thing that we get very excited about is meeting the actors, finding out who the cast are always. Because it's one thing to design a makeup, but usually we're trying to design a makeup that speaks to who the actor is. It works with the actor and doesn't work against him, doesn't turn him into something completely different, So in this case, he was perfect, but we didn't get him until I think the last 2 or 3 weeks before we
left for England to shoot. Yeah.
So we got his casts done in London, and we had them. They came over to LA. We had to put it together very, very fast. But luckily, at that point, the designs were signed off on, and everybody liked the idea. And we had this thought that we knew we were going to definitely go and film. Part of the film was going to be done at the castle that they used for Nosferatu in Slovakia. And so, again, with this sort of evolving idea of Dracula and Dracula characters and vampires in general, we thought it'd be a nice thing. We knew that his fingernails were going to drop out, and we knew that his hair, he's going to lose his hair. And so we thought, this is where we can really sort of bring in that he's sort of becoming Nosferatu-like. And so we started aspects of that with the skull shape. But the idea that he's sort of, it's not like, Dracula's he's a successful vampire in that story. You know, he's managed to live and stay alive, and he's very good at being a vampire. But all the other vampires are kind of failed and weird experiments, you know.
Yes.
Harker's sort of suffering with it. You know, he doesn't realize it, actually, I don't want to give any spoilers, but he doesn't realize that he's a vampire at first. And it comes as a shock to him, you know, shock to his system. We like the idea as well. Another great plot point I thought that Mark and Steven put in there was that he basically got two characters and joined them together. He kind of got Renfield and Harker and kind of put them together, which was a very strong idea, because one of the things that you'll notice if you look back on all the different movies that have been made in the past is that Harker has always been a very difficult character to be successful with. Yes. You know, a lot of people have had trouble with it. Yes. They tend to not really know what to do with the character. Filmmakers have trouble knowing quite what to do with it. And somehow by joining them together, it seemed to make one strong character with a really great character arc, you know. Yes.
I think it really helped as well with, you know, the fact that John was playing the part, because he is such an amazing actor. Yeah. And the great thing is that he knew that he was going to be going through a lot in this episode, and he knew that we were going to be putting a lot of makeup on him. But he was completely up for it, and he really wanted to just immerse himself in the whole thing. So that was good for us, because not only did we get on, but it was also a really nice collaboration between us, in that he would just try things and he just didn't mind. I mean, the only other difficult part was that because he was so into when he was doing his performance, he was just so passionate, and by the end of it, it'd be hard to keep anything on him, wasn't it? Because he'd just throw himself on the floor, and before you know it, there's a finger missing, and you're like, oh no, so there was a bit of that going on. But
we sort of embraced that, though, didn't we?
We did, totally.
We wanted him to be kind of messed up and dirty and not really looking after himself. This sort of sense of it being a disease and this sort of decay
totally helped
thing that's going,
Yeah.
But so all of those things went into that design, and we knew there was going. At one point, they were trying to set out how many stages he was going to go through for his character. At one point, I think got up to 15 or something.
Yeah,
we were like,
insane.
"There's not. There literally isn't. There isn't 15 stages between John Heffernan and this last character. This is not.
What we ended up doing, which was great, was that we, the straight makeup department, Marcus Whitney, kind of took him so far, and then we took over with prosthetics. We sort of dovetailed, and to sort of take him the whole way. But I think in the end, we had three look him, and then I think Marcus might have had about 5, I think, or something. Sort of just different.
But given the a lot of it was his hair falling out and stuff like this, and him becoming more gaunt. And we had all these wigs that we made for him, and then John Heffernan has sort of reddish hair. They thought that at the beginning we were talking about him perhaps having black hair like Dracula. So they kind of, as one gets stronger, the other one gets weaker, and they kind of cross over in the middle there somewhere. And so we didn't have a lot of time, but we handmade all of these wigs, and they're all like black hair. And then suddenly it was decided, actually, he's more sympathetic with red hair. So it was like, okay, well, we're not using any of these then. So those had to get thrown out, and we had to start making these kind of ginger-coloured wigs. Yeah, and then they very quickly.
They sort of wanted it. They didn't want him to go completely grey as he was losing his hair, but they wanted the colour to be drained out so that it looked really dry, and it looked like it was just kind of falling out.
Frazzled.
It was just sort of dry and unhealthy. And so we sort of did we started off with his own hair, and then we went slightly lighter, and put a few more whites in it, and kind of tried to drain it out, make it feel dry as it went on before he lost his hair. So it had a bit of a journey.
Yeah, like I say again, he was the other part of that makeup. The things that he did in it, the way he was in that makeup, it just brought it to life.
Yeah, if there ever was an actor who took everything from the makeup and just kind of ran with it, it was him.
Yeah.
It was him. It never hindered him in any way. He just loved it. And there were many times where we were doing different stages in one day. So he'd have, one stage where he had the big cheekbones, but it was his own hair, and then we would have to swap him over, and then he would have like the receding hair in the afternoon. So it was a lot of in and out of the makeup, but he was wonderful. We love working with him.
The biggest challenge in looking at that makeup is in the final version, the final stage. He's so gaunt in that makeup, which means you had to build up his face quite a bit to then carve in those wonderful sunken areas. And that can easily distort the features when you're building up like that. So how did you guys handle that challenge?
The pieces were actually very, very thin. It was a little highlight and shadow that we could do to kind of help it. But we were very lucky in that his face was very well suited to that. So if you put a very small amount on his cheekbone, suddenly his cheeks go right in. It's very, very thin.
And up in the forehead area, you got some wonderful shape as well, just that sunken in. It was really well done. Was that all silicone pieces, guys?
Yeah.
All silicone, yeah.
It was all silicone pieces, and it's a tough makeup to do though, because there's nowhere to hide with like a bald Nosferatu character, and the lighting conditions continue to change as what we started with the makeup. We looked at it on the screen, and we're in candlelight. We were going in and we were really adding shadow and trying to sort of get the shapes to work on by looking at him on camera. And then as his conversation goes on, it becomes daylight. And so all of a sudden we were like, we can't do any of that anymore. It's all got to come off now. So even throughout the show, his makeup continued to evolve. And they would go from, in more like morning light to nighttime within the same day sometimes. So it's like we're constantly looking at it and staring at it and going, what do we do now? What should we do?
Or John would be sort of riling around on the floor, and he'd come up and it'd just be dirt. Oh. And in the end, it was like, well, look, he's rolling around on the floor. He's in a castle. It's dirty. So we embraced it and kind of went with it, because otherwise there was no way.
Yeah.
There was no way.
Yeah.
But I actually think it really added to, because he hasn't slept. He hasn't really eaten anything. He's dirty. He's been rolling around in the castle. So it just makes sense for the character anyway, really.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that was a flawless makeup. Honestly, it was one of the highlights of the series for me. I loved that makeup. I also thought you guys did a beautiful job with Claes's reverse transformation from old to young, from old Transylvanian to young dapper Englishman. Let's talk about that makeup. And I saw a little Gary Oldman in the older version. There's some nods to that, the long-haired Count. But let's just talk about that design process and Claes's transformation a little bit.
Right. Well, so as soon as we knew that Claes was going to be Dracula, we met with him and we took a lot of photographs of him. We started working with his face and seeing what we could do to adapt things to him. We knew he was going to be basically drained of blood and very pale. And he's not, when we see him at first, he's not just old. He's also not sort of surviving
really
very well.
Yeah.
He's not an old man. He's an old vampire.
Exactly.
So the color is drained from his face, but the wrinkles are not necessarily like you would get naturally on an old person. We tried to get some of the textures. I don't know how successful we were in actually getting this to register on film, but some of the textures and things were more about basically having the blood sucked out of the skin. So the skin is kind of sucked onto his skull,
Mm-hmm. Especially around the forehead, there was a lot of that, wasn't there?
Yeah. But also, nobody wanted Dracula to be old and feeble. Mm-hmm. We wanted him to still be powerful as an older Dracula. So, of course, one of the things that we could do, we thought about this and we talked about it. We thought, well, one of the things we can do to show this transformation as he goes through is have his hair be basically grown out and long as an older person, and then as he gets younger, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter until it becomes the Dracula hair that we see in the movie. And along the way, we knew that we were going to have this Christopher Lee stage, that was basically where he's still hairline is still quite far back, and the hair is pretty much the Christopher Lee hair from Dracula and Dracula AD 1972.
It's probably Dracula AD 1972,
Yeah.
Oh, how
that was pretty much the model for his hair.
how wonderful that you got to
hair as the older.
yeah, how wonderful that you got to nod to Christopher Lee in this.
Sorry. It was even in the script as well when they talked about his stage, is that he now looks like Christopher Lee.
Great.
Which I thought was brilliant.
I can't tell you. We shot this at Bray Studios, which is the studio that Hammer built, basically, on the same stages where those films were made. And we got to look at Christopher Lee. We were, there we were in the castle set, which was amazing. And there's Place in his full Christopher Lee makeup with the cloak and everything, and coming down the stairway. And we were just it was me and Lou and Mark Gatiss were just standing there, and we're sort of mesmerised. And Place is just trying to walk down without falling down the stairs, of course. He's got a cloak and everything. But it was mesmerising. We just all looked at each other and we went, it doesn't get any better than this.
No, it was the perfect moment. Yeah. And it was like, if only our 12-year-old selves could see us now, we were all just like really excited. It was a good day. That was the first day he was in that Christopher Lee look, and it was very dramatic. I think they ended up cutting out that shot of him walking down the stairs.
Yeah, maybe it'll be in some extended cut sometime.
But,
I think there's lots of stuff that they could put in an extended version of it that got cut out. But we did, actually. But going back to the older version, we thought, well, just white, everything about him is drained. So we went, we know we're going to go for white hair, basically. And we were looking around for sort of inspiration, and we just looked slightly to one side and went, well, it's Rick, isn't it? It's Rick Baker's hair.
Ah, great.
So we put it on, and I said to Rick, do you mind if we do this? And Rick was like, no, do it. That's really cool. So we went full Rick Baker hair as the older version. And we had a wig made, and he was the perfect. I mean, he has exactly this great widow's peak and everything that we were looking for. So we knew that was one end of the scale, and at the other end of the scale was Clace, and then we had to figure out the pieces in between. So we did some Photoshop designs. In fact, we did Photoshop designs before we met Clace. We'd taken some pictures off of the internet of Clace, which was. We struggled with because we couldn't find anywhere where he didn't have a slight beard. But we found some, and if we could find those, he was doing something that he shouldn't be doing, like making some goofy face or something,
Right.
But eventually we found some very nice pictures of Clace minus the beard and looking intense. So we did some Photoshop things, and we incorporated Rick's hair into the Photoshop and everything. And we sent those off to Mark and to Sue and to Steven. And we got a great reaction straight away. Like, they just loved. They were like, "Yes, this is exactly what we were thinking of." And actually, that was the case throughout this process. Is that every time we did a design, our experience, and I'm sure yours and all the other makeup people who are listening to this will say the same thing, is that the design period usually torture, and you usually do your first thoughts are your best, and those get immediately turned away, and then you go around in this great big long design circle until you finally resubmit the first one again, and then everyone goes, "Yeah, why don't you do it like that in the first place?"
He designs later.
So. These guys are not like that. These guys, they knew what they wanted, and we knew that we all were kind of drawing from the same ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were all so on the same page, and we were all so passionate about it that it was actually quite an easy process, and we'd send off the design, and within an hour we'd have an answer. I mean, there was no waiting around. But what was great was that they knew that we had a very, very short amount of time to do the build and to get all the makeup stuff done before they started shooting. So they were great like that.
But I said to Mark at one point, I said, "Look, what do you want here? Do you want us to go big? Or do you want us to sort of to go a little bit more subtle?" And he was like, no, big, always big. And so we were like, oh, okay.
Brilliant. We can give you that.
Wait until you see what we're going to do then.
So Mike, I have a question about the transformation. So you started with the old, you wound up finally with Clace. How many stages in between required prosthetics?
3.
3. So it was
3 stages. So we had the pale, older looking vampire, and then there was like a stage in the middle where after he'd been feeding on Jonathan, that he started to get some colour in his face.
Yeah, he's getting some blood flowing.
Yeah. And now his hair is getting grey. Now he's starting to get dark hair coming in. So it was like the longer hair was falling out, and then the white hair was kind of falling out, and then the dark hair was growing in, kind of thing.
Yeah, so every time we can come back to him, his hairline sort of inches forward, and
the colour starts
and the widow's peak starts to come in more, So the second stage, so now he's got blood. Now he's getting younger. It's almost the same makeup, but it's, a very different treatment of that makeup. It's actually one of my favourite stages.
Mine too. And it's so funny because he's in it for like 20 seconds. Mm-hmm. And it was actually Clace's favourite stage, was that middle stage. Mm-hmm. I think it's because he really, really could see himself in that. Because the other one we had a lot of, we took some pieces off, didn't we, for that stage?
Yeah, so we had a nose piece that we just took away. We took his ear pieces off. We had these long lobes and these bigger ears and everything. And, of course, the whole paint job was changed in the way we coloured the pieces. But it's basically the same makeup reused because it was just far more economical to design it that way. And it was amazing how different the 2 stages look to each other just by doing those subtle things. His hand, we took his hands off. Took his hands off as well because we knew that the very first thing we would see would be a young version of Dracula's hand in the shot. So that was I enjoyed that day. I enjoyed doing that makeup. Beautiful lighting, candlelight, everything you would want, to sort of make it look nice and make, look really cool. And of course, at that point, Heffernan.
I was gonna say not only the lighting, but also his performance in each phase was so perfectly calibrated. The way he was changing from Transylvanian to Englishman, he really. He handled that just so well. So another great performance and makeup matched up.
Yeah, and then there again, you see, that was our way of explaining why Bela Lugosi can have, his accent and Christopher Lee just sounds English.
Yes.
Well, we show why that happens. He starts off as Bela Lugosi and he becomes Christopher Lee, when he eventually becomes Clace,
Yes.
But Clace is Danish, and English is not his first language. He speaks about 4 different languages, like Christopher Lee. There's so many similarities to him and Christopher Lee. They're both about the same height. He towers above everybody, and when he puts the cloak on, it seems to add another foot to his height.
He looks so much taller with the cloak on. It's unbelievable, actually.
Yeah. And he, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, he sounds a bit too London." That's what English people were saying. We're going, "Yeah, he may sound that, but that's he's not speaking his language. He's speaking a foreign language when you hear him as Dracula. That's." He speaks German. He speaks. When we were in Slovakia, he was picking up Slovakian. He was talking to some of the Slovakian people who'd never spoke it before, but he has an ear for it, and it's not the ear that we gave him.
And I'm assuming, like Harker's makeup, this was completely silicone makeup, correct, for Dracula?
Yes.
Okay.
So we did some very early tests where we wanted the makeup to be very, very translucent, so you could see muscles and things under the skin. They were very interesting and very cool. We didn't end up going that way in the end. And the main reason was because we realized that once you go that translucent with the appliances, you start to lose. You can't see the detail anymore. It goes away. And so all of the old, it actually younger.
Yeah, it was weird, wasn't it?
Didn't work the way we were thinking. So we tried this was a very interesting design period because we tried a lot of different stuff, and some of it made it through and some of it didn't. But well, actually, when you see the photographs, you'll see some stuff in there that's not in the show. But it's interesting nonetheless,
Well, I can't wait to see. And now I think we should transition to episode 2. I would like to talk about that corpse puppet in the coffin. Episode 2. They're on their way to London. They're on the ship. Another great episode. Dracula's doing his thing and picking them off one by one. The thing that stood out to me makeup effects-wise and practical effects-wise was that corpse in the coffin. Can we talk about that corpse and how you pulled that off?
That was Gary, wasn't it? Yeah, he was actually one of our stunt chaps in that makeup, and he was great. I mean, we wanted it to sort of be, they talked about what did they talk about? They didn't call them zombies. They sort of. Well, I can't remember what they called them.
They're not zombies exactly. They're kind of revenants. They're failed Dracula experiments.
Failed Dracula mates, aren't they? Really?
They won't die. They can't die. And they probably wish they could die. So that was one of the ideas. We knew the piece was going to be sort of set in India, so that gave us a colour palette for the hair and for the skin colours and all that sort of stuff. And
we knew it was going to be decayed. It was going to be there was going to be a lot of decay there.
Yeah, we worked with Fangs Effects, the company, Chris Lyons' company, and he made some nice teeth that came right out. They clipped in and they came right outside of the face, so that we could really work on that rotting face thing and have no lips and all that sort of stuff. It was something that came together very, very fast, and that was just something we had fun with. What you have to remember is that we were hired to do episode 1. We had heard that there was something in episode 2
or 3,
yeah. And so we thought as soon as we episode 1, we were coming home. But everybody loved the stuff, they got all excited about it, and they went crazy over the dog transformation, the wolf, where Dracula comes out of the wolf.
Yeah. Yes.
So they said we need more stuff in the other episodes. So that came at us quite fast. So we just did that very fast, and then really enjoyed it and had fun with it.
It was a fun day. We shot for a day. It was great. Yeah,
in a beautiful Victorian house, in the middle of the countryside, and this whole show was like that. It was just every day you'd get up and this is so cool, and so that was it, just one day, and it was a one shot wonder really, and we had fun. That's about all the story there is to that. There's a couple of other things we did in episode 2 that may have gone unnoticed. One was the severed hand that runs around.
Oh yes
on the ship.
That's right. Did you green screen out a performer's arm and have them perform that for you?
Yeah, we did. So we built a stump that comes out and sort of slightly decayed looking makeup on the hand, not too much, not too far gone. And we got a pretty good hand double from one of our guys who was in the workshop. We applied that to him, and he did it on the day. And then they green screened out all the rest of it. And we also made a big stump that fit onto the actor.
Yeah, onto Yusuf. Yeah. So the character who had the one arm. Yeah, we did that. We had a stump, and then we actually made his prop that he wore where he was cooking with the spike. We actually made that prop as well for that. Yeah, we did. Lou made all the kind of leather work and the thing, so you could really use it. You could actually stick it in meat and sort of use it to cut things. Yeah. All these different spikes he could just take on and put off, and then he had the soft versions of that as well. We had fun doing that as well, because we like to get into the costume prop things. That's one of the things we really enjoy doing. But when it's such a crossover between the makeup effects, it sort of works out perfectly, because then everything's so much quicker as it goes on, and you just get that nice blend of the two. And another thing in that episode that you won't see, but we had to do it, which we had to make a silicone stunt mask of Dracula that the stuntman could wear for when he gets set on fire.
Yep.
So there's lot of technical stuff we had to do there to make sure that it was safe for.
So what turns out to be a really supposedly a light episode for us ended up being quite busy in the end.
Yeah,
really. Yeah.
But that ship set was amazing. I mean, it was one day it was the castle, and then the next day we were sort of going to lunch, and the castle was gone, and there was like an actual ship built in the stage. I mean, like all of it was there.
It's unbelievable.
And we were just like, what? How did that get there? You know?
It was magnificent because you could walk around into all of the rooms. So it was like being on a real ship.
Yeah.
It was magnificent. The production design was amazing.
Incredible work. Yeah. But,
and I loved I loved the cast of characters on that ship. It was just the perfect blend of people. Very much an Agatha Christie whodunit in a way. People just keep dying, and who's the killer? It was just really well done. Really well done. Any other stuff in episode 2 that you want to mention before we talk about episode 3?
No, I mean, that was sort of everything that we did. You know, I will say that we were excited that the old woman character was going to be played by an actress who has got some sort of credentials in the sort of genre. You know, she was in a show called Space 1999, which I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Sure.
Which was a Jerry Anderson show that both Chris and Peter Cushing were in at various stages, but she was also in a lot of sort of genre television, and I think she'd more or less retired, but she came out and she wanted to do this, and so
she played the Duchess.
That was kind of cool.
The old Duchess.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, she was terrific.
We're just saying maybe we should just do a little segue into the wolf, where Dracula is born from the wolf and rips his way out of the body, because that was quite.
That's quite a big number, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a big number.
Yes, when he's outside the convent.
Yeah.
Yes, that sequence. We can talk about that. Let's talk about how you had Dracula emerge bloody and freshly born out of the carcass of a wolf. Let's talk about it.
Well, again, when we read that, in the past it's been depicted in very different ways. Sometimes he's kind of a werewolf character, but in the original book, he runs off, I think, off of the Demeter as a wolf. I think that's how he comes off of the boat. Forgive me if I've got that wrong. I'm not quite sure if I remember that correctly, but I think that's how he comes off the boat at Whitstable. Whitby. Yeah. So we'd seen him as a werewolf, and we'd seen him done various different ways, but we thought for this version it would be fun for him to literally rip his way out of a wolf's body. We talked about this, and we talked about how we were going to do it, and that we'd need a slightly elaborate setup for it, because we were going to have to build the whole thing on a raised stage so that we could get everybody underneath the stage to puppeteer the various bits of the wolf, but also to get the performers to come through. And the idea was that as he comes through smaller than he is normally.
Yeah, not fully formed.
Yeah. So we got some contortionists who were very thin and could do unbelievable stuff with their bodies, a woman and a man, for this, so that we could have two different stages of this transformation. The girl was very, very thin indeed, unbelievably thin, and could do really incredible stuff. And then we had to put a makeup on her so that she didn't look like a woman, because she's going to come through naked. So she had a chest piece on.
Yeah, she had a chest piece. She had the mask that we put on, which was sort of Dracula not quite formed yet.
Yeah. So we had this idea that when he comes out, his features have formed properly. So we made a mask out of Clay's life cast, from his life cast, of his face. But then we made it so the lips hadn't formed around his teeth yet. So he's sort of like a unborn shark, really. That all of his fangs are just exposed in there. And then we had a sort of membrane thing that went over the top of that, which was cast onto it. That was very tricky to get this thing to cast up perfectly with no air bubbles and be perfectly clear silicone, so you could see through it. And then the performers, not Clace, the performers would wear that for the two different stages of them coming out. We also, of course, had to build the wolf. So we built basically a hollow wolf with an animatronic head that you could move around. You actually put your arm up inside it and move it. And, kind of like the dog thing, actually.
Yep.
And you could open and close the mouth and then do all that sort of stuff. And then the legs could kind of
jointed,
and they could kind of kick around and stuff. And the tail could swish around as well. But it was basically hollow. Basically it had little animatronic bits at the extremities, and then this big hole. Well, I say big hole. It wasn't big at all. It was small because we knew that these guys coming through it were tiny. So we figured it all out. We knew that was perfect. We got down below underneath the stage, and we slimed up these guys. And then they came out and did this sort of incredible sort of crab walk because they're
sort of pushing through the membrane and then kind of breaking through.
I forgot the membrane. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we thought, well, that's fine if they come through and they're all covered in blood. But let's put another layer in there. Let's put this sort of big membrane in there that they have to kind of rip their way through. So we looked into this and we thought maybe we could use latex or we could use lycra for the membrane. And then we thought, no, let's see if we can get something that's super stretchy so they can do really strange stuff as they come through it. They're doing all this contortionist stuff. We want to be able to see through it and have them kind of push out through it. We did a bit of research and we found this...
hot melt vinyl.
Yeah, it's basically a vinyl that you could use. But the trouble was that you could only buy the gigantic drum of this stuff, and it was like more than we'd ever need for the rest of our lives, and we just on a BBC budget we just couldn't justify spending that money. So our mold maker Brian Ray actually he said, well, they use it for these sex toys. They use it for these things called fleshlights, and we were and he said and he said and you could maybe just take out the piece that you need and we could melt it down and we could use that and then we don't have to buy so much. And we said, that's a brilliant idea. Where do you get that? Brian seemed to know exactly where to get that and volunteered to go and buy them.
It was great. He even went and bought them for us. I was so impressed.
Yeah. So he was gone for 2 days. And
terrible.
That's great.
He came back. I don't know what the people in the shop must have thought because we bought them out.
Yeah,
and that's what we used, and we melted them down, and we coloured the urethane. The vinyl, I should say.
So there was all little veins in it. So, I mean, you couldn't really see it in the show, but we kind of put it in there anyway.
There's a lot of stuff that doesn't show that we did in that effect. Like you couldn't really see Place's face from the teeth and everything through the mask, the way they lit it and the way they filmed it. But
I think
ultimately it looks great.
It looks great, and the thing is though is that we were doing this whole thing on the day. And all the contortionists, they all came out, and Clace was on the set, and he was standing behind the monitor, and he went, "Oh, I want to do it." And we were like, "Clace, this is never going to fit. You're never going to be able to get through it. Look at the size of your shoulders." And he was like, "No," he said, I really think I should do it." And we were like, "Well, let's just see, I guess." But a little bit worried. He was like, "No, just slime me up and push me through." And we were like, "Okay." So he decided, right the way through, the director was like, "Yeah, let's go for it." So we put the mask on and we did. Oh, no, you didn't have the mask. No. That's it. I'm sorry. So he pretty much just stripped down. We slimed him up and he did the whole thing and he came through. And they were never going to have him come through in that way. But I'm so glad they did because it made it so good. He was great. He was amazing.
And he did not fit,
He did.
But it was like a piece of soap, He was below, completely naked. A bunch of puppeteers down there who were going to operate the wolf, and we're there underneath, and we kind of pushing him through this thing, and he comes through, and of course then he stops and has a conversation with the nuns. Well, that's great stuff from film. Yes. But now we're left with the lower half of him underneath there. That's all we've got, But we got him out. He came all the way out. And
so funny.
The next, his ribs were
next day bruised and grazed.
But he didn't complain.
Didn't complain one bit.
No, he was fabulous, all the naked stuff that he did was in Slovakia, and it was snowing.
Oh.
And he was naked a week in front of those nuns. And when I say naked, not be naked, where you're kind of naked, but you're sort of covered up. You've got like a piece to cover you.
Right.
No, naked. And we were going, this is a great way to get to know you, Glace.
That's true. And that was the first we could do. After that, we were like, we can do anything. It's fine.
Well, what a classic sequence! What a classic sequence that is, where he's emerges, he's covered in blood, he's completely nude, and he's got a showdown with these commando nuns. It's just so good. That was a classic sequence, truly classic. So congratulations. Yeah. I know you wish more of the emergence, more of the detail had been seen in the end, but it was very effective. And, maybe you didn't see every little thing you guys did, but what you did see worked very, very well. Let's transition to episode 3. We have one more big makeup to talk about.
Right.
All right. So episode 3... we are now in the modern era. Dracula has been at the bottom of the ocean for 100 some odd years, and he emerges to a whole new world, and we meet Agatha Van Helsing's doppelganger, her great-great-granddaughter or whatever, and we also meet Lucy, played by Lydia West. Lydia West. Yeah. And she becomes the object of Dracula's obsession. And I don't want to go into too much for those of you who haven't seen the show, but there's a wonderful makeup on Lucy at the end there. A terrible, terrible burn, full body makeup. Really successful makeup. Let's talk about how you guys pulled that one off.
Yeah, so again, now we've done half the build in London, and we're then gone over to work at Bray, and we had a workshop at Bray. No real big facilities there or anything, We had a big space, but we didn't have a lot of things there that, you would normally have if you were setting up a workshop. And, of course, we didn't have the luxury of time either, because this is something that we would normally have planned very, very early on, and we would have done it. But, we basically didn't get episode 3 until we were about halfway through episode 2.
Yeah.
So we didn't know what was in the script. So Lucy, we didn't have a great deal of time to do it, but we found some very successful ways of doing, very unconventional ways of doing the suit. And one of the problems is that we had her, but we also felt that we needed to have a stunt version of her, and we also felt that at one point there was going to be a dummy version of her for when she gets staked through the chest. So all of these versions had to be built in very, very efficiently in very quick time. But they were all kind of different stages. They were all, different actors and different actresses in these things who were not necessarily the same build, the same size. So if we had approached this as you normally would, making a suit, as in you do a full body cast, and then you take that body cast and you sculpt a suit over the top, which you then mold, and then you pour it up in whatever material you're going to make and stick a zipper in the back and someone can step into it. We didn't have that luxury because there wasn't enough time for us to get all that mold work done. So what Lou did was take very, very accurate, we took a bunch of very accurate pictures of Lucy.
Measurements and everything.
And then we took all these measurements, and we basically took those measurements, and Lou made patterns off of her body that could be drawn out flat, and then the idea was hopefully when you sculpt all these pieces completely flat, that you could piece this suit together and it would all fit her,
Yeah, it was like sort of a giant map. Like I patterned up her whole body, broke it all down, and pretty much drew a map of where the muscles were on her body, because when it's flat, it's hard to tell, especially the way we kind of broke it up so that you couldn't see any seams. And so it was there was a map of where everything was, and then there'd be little pieces, and then Dave would sculpt the texture on it, so that by the time we put it all together, it was almost like everything sort of interlocked, and then so that you could have, if you had a piece of an arm and then a bit of a body, the shoulder or something, it would blend right in, so it didn't look like it was all disjointed and just mishmash texture.
Yeah. The textures, we decided that we were going to try and use as many real textures as we could. So we got a bunch of different materials, and we actually burned them with and got all these sort of great textures that would be really difficult to sculpt normally. And then we could we had little flat molds of those, and we could put clay in there and peel these little pieces of texture in that we liked in particular, and we could place them wherever we wanted on the body, and then we could sculpt the in-between bits,
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really successful, really great way of doing it. And the great thing about having done it as a pattern is that you can then make the pattern smaller or bigger for the other actor and take it in. So we didn't have to sculpt two different versions of it. We just did the one version that we could adapt for all of them.
And also because it was all silicone backed with a stretch neck spandex. It was stretchy, so we could pull it really, really tight and really get it skin tight on her, so there wasn't any weird wrinkles or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't want any zippers in it because, it's always hard to kind of hide that stuff, especially if she was doing quite a few physical things. So it was actually, she had they were skin tight trousers that kind of came up under her bust. And then she had a whole one piece with sleeves that was like a leotard that then went, through her legs and kind of did up on her crotch area. And then we had there were some extra pieces that we wanted to put on, so we put some hip bones on and shoulder blades and bits and pieces to really play around with her proportions, and that worked really well. That was quite successful.
Yeah. And then the makeup was basically, it was a makeup that was done in the more traditional way. We took a life cast of her and we sculpted it up. And I think that was in sort of 2 or 3 pieces.
It was 2. I think was it 2?
So it was a whole head. It was like a hood with no face. With half a face, right?
Yeah, it was. So it was 3 pieces. So it was like a hood with a neck, and then we had two face pieces.
And then a kind of much more closer, subtle version on this side than on that side. And so that was the extra piece that went on.
Because the guys were quite particular, weren't they? They didn't want to completely lose her face.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
And then we had these contact lenses made that were kind of we had pictures of eyes that had been actually burned in fires and things, and they do all kinds of weird things. They kind of bubble up, they mist over, that kind of you see with boiled fish, sometimes. We had those made.
They were great, those lenses.
They were very good.
Yeah.
And then we had to make little pieces of wig of hair that hadn't quite burned off, but that just went here, there, and everywhere. And we made a whole bunch of those just so that we could kind of say to them, look, do you want more or do you want less?
Yeah, because I think we'd have probably not put any hair on it.
I think ideally we would have had, we thought maybe no hair.
To go. Yeah. But they wanted some sort of recognisable things that you could sort of, where it was a little bit more subtle, we still had a little piece of a tiny little bit of eyebrow and a little bit of hair on one side. So
yeah. One of the things that happens when people get burned, one of the nasty aspects if you live through it, is that your clothes, if they're made of artificial fibers, they will shrink wrap themselves. They get burned, they heat up, and they shrink wrap themselves onto your burns, and they fuse with your skin. Oh. And we thought that was kind of cool, and that's something that we could really show here. And particularly because she was very fond, all of her wardrobe was very sparkly and had lots of sequins and things. We thought, wow, how cool to have the sequins become part of her skin. They've burned their way in. And so we
embraced that.
Bits of fabric, and we burned them, and we aged them, and then we painted them,
laid them in.
We
laid them into the silicone.
Into wet silicone on the skin. And then the final thing, which I think was a real great thing, was I remember I did a design early on where she had fangs, and then we're like, no, they don't show their fangs until they're kind of ready to feed. So we thought, what can we do? And we'd been messing around with these mouth effects things that colour your inside of your mouth. So we got a brown one and a black one to try out. And I was like, that's great.
Yeah, smoky mouth.
So now she's burned on the inside as well as the outside, and it's delicious too. So she loved it. She couldn't wait to get that in between takes. And again, we lucked out in that Lydia was just so up to do anything, And
she'd never worn prosthetics before, never wore a suit before, so it was all new to her. But she just went for it. She was great.
Yeah.
And her performance is wonderful too. I mean, it's so emotional.
It really is. And, that makeup could have failed very easily. And I think that the way that it was so low profile that it felt as if she had been burned, not added to, it really worked so well. And what a great way to finish the series with a fantastic full body makeup. I loved that one. Now, was there anything that didn't make it into episode 3 that you want to talk about? I know there was the dead child in the graveyard. I don't know if you guys had anything to do with that or... Yes? Great. So let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah, that was us.
So what happens is that Lucy gets followed home by a dead child from the graveyard. Oh. This is a dark series.
Ooh.
We talked about this with Mark, and we were talking about how we should look and everything. And the first thing Mark said was, he said, well, he should wear one of those little suits that they bury kids in. He goes, because if you bury a kid in a suit, you know he's going to come back. That's what happens in films. And you go, no, that's true. It's like, it's creepy, So, but then it kind of evolved into more of a kind of 1970s kind of look. We said, look, it's going to be hard for a kid to have to put up with all this stuff, And
you're going to have restrictions.
It's for us to do with it, but to have a kid. So we said, but we know this guy called Kieran Shah, who we've worked with on so many projects, and he's a little person. He's a stunt man, and boy, can he wear suits. He can work blind. Yeah. He's just brilliant at doing this sort of stuff, and he's perfectly proportioned. So it will really work to put this on him. And so we got Kieran in. We actually had a live cast of him that we had done for the Wolfman originally, and he doesn't look too different, so we didn't need to do a live cast of him. We started with that. We wanted, he's like, if he's been dead since the 70s, there's so little of him left. So we wanted his eyes to have completely gone, and we wanted his no lips. We wanted to be able to see his teeth and everything. He's sort of like a little bit like the Jack puppet from American Werewolf in London, except this is a child,
It was also sort of trying to bring in the corpse from episode 2 that we did, and trying to bring in those ideas of his mouth being gone and him being more kind of skeletal. So it was basically taking that concept and pushing it a bit further. Really.
Yeah. And it was we had dentures made that fit into his mouth that came outside. They were big dentures,
they were huge,
really big. I mean, they came right out further than his nose.
Over the top.
And you had to make a hole so that his nose would fit into the dentures, and he was breathing through the roof of his mouth. Because it was that far. And then we really messed with the proportions of him so that he looked like one of those 70s kids with kind of a big child head and kind of 70s hair.
Yeah, he had this sort of 70s hair.
And then we made him gloves as well. And again, we already had hand casts of him, I think.
Otherwise we would have never had time to
wouldn't have been able to do it. No. And they finished with little bones sticking through the ends of his fingers, and then he wore it. I mean, the thing is that we made it so that it was a mask. The teeth went on first, and then it was more or less a mask that you pulled it over the top in silicone, and he pulled on the hands. But it was made with a zipper so that you could take it off between takes. But Kieran, being Kieran,
he just kept it on.
We just put him in, and he was there all night. That was it. He didn't once ask to come out. Well, he may have done, but we couldn't really understand it.
Well, definitely one of the creepiest moments in the series were the moments with him. There's something about little dead people that just freaks me out. So I would love to, at this point, just if there are any key members of your team that you would like to name check. You mentioned Brian Ray and his sex toy adventure, your mold maker. Is there anyone else that stands out that you feel that you feel deserve a shout out?
Yeah. Well, Steve Koch, who did a lot of the sculpting and was kind of our workshop supervisor, was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's Carol as well, who's also Carol Koch, who's also sculpting for us.
Yeah. We had
lots of people.
In the UK we had Richard Martin
and Stuart
Bray, who was fantastic. We had Lisa
Carrascido
and Patrick Carrascido Barbette. Yep.
So we really only had like 4 or 5 people in our crew when we were in the UK, and then we had the odd makeup artist coming and doing dailies. We actually had a tiny crew, really.
Yeah, this show was done on enthusiasm and free on-set food, basically.
But then the crew we had here, Art Sakamoto, who did Clace's teeth,
very important,
were magnificent, and he was amazing. He also did Clace's nails too. He was great.
Yeah, in the silicone.
Well, I give you a little list, maybe.
Yes, that's what we'll do.
So afraid I'll do something.
I don't want to leave anyone out.
At the bottom of the article, we will have a full list of anyone you would like to credit for their contributions. So don't worry. My final question. We have arrived at my final question. I personally feel like we have entered and have been entering, but are now really in it, a renaissance of sorts in the makeup effects and practical effects industry. What do you guys think? Do you feel that way? And why? Why do you think it's happened?
Yeah, I mean, I do see it. I see it for all the reasons that we've always said, which is that this stuff is there not just for the show, but it's there for the actors too. You know, we've always said it's a very important part of the process, and we've been told this so many times by so many actors, is the process of them getting into character and becoming the character, and that process is done very often early in the morning as they look in the mirror and they see themselves arriving in the part, and it affects actors in some lots of different ways. You know, I mean, when we put Ian McKellen in the younger version of his makeup on Mr. Holmes, he was younger. He acted younger all the time, not just on set, but all the time. And yet, when we put him in the old version of his makeup, we had to almost help him out of the makeup trailer, and we were looking after him all day because he was a much, much older person in the makeup. And that's part of his process.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, he would immerse himself in it, and I think that is very important to keep that good makeup and even a good costume. Exactly the same thing is that it helps with the actor. It helps them take them to the place they need to get to. You know,
it also raises the bar for everybody on set.
Agree.
Is that, I mean, we could have been working on a green screen and they could have put the castle around us. But we didn't. First of all, we were in a real castle that had real history, and that really helped out. Everybody was like, wow, we couldn't believe, that we were there, and the real snow coming down. And then when we got to Bray and we walked onto did the interiors, and they built this magnificent set, immediately everybody's buzzed about it and excited. And then once you add the makeups and the characters and the costumes and everything else, everything just gets better. So I think that's a big part of it. I think that's really why you're seeing it,
I also think it's that thing that it seems to be these days that there are more prosthetics now being done in television and also in independent movies. So that seems to be where a lot of it seems to be concentrated at the moment, rather than in a lot of the really, really big blockbusters. I mean, I know with some of them there are obviously Guardians of the Galaxy, there's a lot of makeup and stuff in it, but there is also a lot of visual effects. So I think when you're kind of dealing with maybe smaller budgets in TV and in independent movies, it almost gives you more freedom to go back to the practical stuff, because there isn't the money or the time to do all of this CG enhancement. So in a way, it's sort of getting back to basics, but in the best possible way, because it helps the actors, it helps the director, and it helps the whole creative team when they're working on a show. Everything's there. You can touch it. It's tangible.
Yeah. I mean, I think that these smaller arena of television and smaller films is a place where imagination also flourishes. And people get, they do cleverer things, I think, because you get forced to sort of think in a more, not just in a linear way about it. And you don't just fall back on, well, we'll fix that later on, or we'll do it in CG or whatever else. You're really forced to sort of think, well, is there a way that we can do this? And, I guess The Wolf is a very good example of that. It would have been very easy to imagine that being a digital effect. but we were there. We were there with naked people covered in slime and puppet dogs and real blood and
nuns with stakes
in a castle, and it was everything was
there. And
was worked.
I think that a lot of the magic would have been lost if it had been on a green screen stage.
Yeah,
and that's not to say that there isn't a place for visual effects. Of course there is. I just think that it's better when you use all of the tools in your toolbox to create the thing that you need, rather than just one.
What we're finding more and more is that when we're working with visual effects people, they say to us, we'd so much rather you did it. We'd so much rather we could have something there at least to start with, because it helps us and it's just a better process. And there was a time when we would get pushed away by the visual effects people, but I think we're actually now at the stage where we're trying to explore what each of us can do to bring these things alive. So it's not necessarily all us, and it's not necessarily all them. There's this perfect middle ground where we can all exist, and we do better, stronger work.
Yeah, it's what's best for the project. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that this mini-series, in so many ways, embraced practical effects, the sets, the costumes, the makeup effects. Certainly there were some visual effects there when needed, but it was the perfect approach, really. And this is why I have a feeling this mini-series will be looked back upon in years to come as one of the finer treatments of this story, because it was handled the way it was handled. If it had gone all visual effects, I don't think it would hold up. I look back at some of the films that were done in the later 90s, early 2000s, and they just don't hold up. It was all visual effects, but I love that so much practical and makeup effects were in this, and you guys did an absolutely sublime job. So we're excited to share with our community how you did it. And thank you so much for carving out time on your Sunday for chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
And best wishes.
Absolute pleasure.
And best wishes to your mum.
Thank you.
So sweet. Have a good day.
You too, guys. Thanks again.